In this video, I'm going to connect the previous human driving forces with this section, the human activities that then lead to environmental change. And so I'm going to tie in previous discussed ideas with what we got going on right here in human activities where we see direct environmental change. And I ask you, where would this picture be? You probably will tell me, probably Florida, that swampy area. That's somewhere in the Carolinas, perhaps. Maybe it's the Outback and the crocodile hunter and all of that. Well, actually, it's in Indiana. And so much of northern Indiana, which today is heavily agriculture and large fields, large, massive amounts of commercial agriculture, used to look just like this. And so this was seen as progress throughout the 1800s and the early 1900s when agriculture was growing because the population was growing. There's increasing demand for agriculture, the increasing demand for conversion of land to farmland in the United States, especially here in Indiana, the breadbasket of the country. And so essentially what happened here was these marsh areas were essentially filled in, the trees were cleared, and so all that moisture that was on the surface was removed. And so here we see human driving forces, increasing population, increasing demand for food, increasing economic opportunity from turning and converting land from marshland to food, has led to direct change as these areas have been converted into large fields, which you see right here. And so commercial agriculture, we look at the Great Plains of the United States, the states like Iowa, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, even Indiana and Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Those states right there, some have argued, are the most altered area of the world by human beings that exist. And so this area has been heavily converted from its natural state to agriculture. And so once again, increasing population, increasing demand for resources, increasing demand for food makes sense why you're going to see these human activities change. And so agriculture, no doubt, or let's say a primary sector activity, no doubt has a key role in causing environmental change. Further, if we look at agriculture today, especially in stage 4 countries, high developed countries in which we see a large amount of resources put into agriculture, we can see all types of petroleum-based, oil-based products being used here. Of course, you have to have oil to power the tractor. All these various chemicals that allow food to be grown much more productive than ever require more resources. And so we see resources being used to produce resources, i.e. food. So when we think about, for example, ethanol, ethanol was seen as this great idea, corn-based ethanol. We can convert corn to essentially fuel that can go into our cars. That's great. However, you still need fuel to transport the ethanol from the agriculture area, from the cropland, to the facility, the manufacturing facility where it's then converted into ethanol, and then it's got to be transported to the people that actually will put it in their tank at the gas station. And so ethanol still requires a lot of inputs and resources just to grow and convert it to from food to fuel. And so what we've got going on here is we can see human activities, primary sector agriculture, but that's all related to increasing demand for food and higher yields and higher productivity of our agricultural areas. Where in the world is this image? Well, this is actually Brazil. And so earlier I've mentioned the increasing demand for Brazilian steak. And so that makes sense then why you're going to see people in Brazil converting areas to essentially grazing areas for cattle. And so this here was previously a dense rainforest in which it's been cleared using a particular agricultural technique called slash and burn, in which they slash and cut off all the trees, burn them down. It's essentially the quickest, most primitive way to clear a forest and then allow grazing to occur. And so Brazilian steak, you can understand why these farmers, these individuals, are wanting to convert this land. They can make money because now suddenly there's increasing global consumption, global demand for Brazilian steak. And so here are human activities that are driven by human driving forces. And as we continue to pick on Brazil, we see this rainforest, this patch of rainforest that dominates essentially the center of this image. This entire image would have been nothing but what we see there, rainforest. We would see just a massive massive it's from corner to corner, nothing but a dense rainforest / jungle. And so what's happened in Brazil is you're starting to see areas cleared. So they're clearing their rainforest so they could do grazing, or more recently, for biofuels. And so growing sugarcane or growing corn. And so that's the idea there, so that you can convert that to fuel. And so because there's increasing demand for biofuels, Brazilians are essentially clearing areas so they can then grow and produce that increasingly demanded resource. And so this is a particular pattern we see in the Amazon rainforest. Further, what's going on here is the type of soil, and I'll explain this a little bit later on, but the type of soil that you find here is called detritus. And so what that is a soil that it's very, very good for growing trees, growing, this dense rainforest. However, once the soil is kind of disturbed and ruined and kind of the nutrients are picked out, essentially it's useless. It's rendered useless. There's nothing you can do out of it. And so what they'll do is they'll just move on to the next area. And that's something called shifting cultivation. So we can see that actually here, in which they clear an area and then they just move on to the next one once that area has been depleted. Here we have New York City. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And so New York City, we can see very vibrant nightlife. All those lights, all that energy being used. Where does it come from? It comes from here, the coal fields of Appalachia. So increasing demand for resources. We can understand that. And so it makes sense, New York City, why they need this coal, because they need power. They need the electricity. They need all those buildings lit up in that skyline image that we just saw. Further, we can see here mining occurring, so increasing demand for resources. You can see how this then, of course, will lead to environmental change. And so human activities, mining in this case, a quarry, in which they're scooping up the rock, and you can see how they do a very terraced, a very almost stair-step pattern here of environmental change. And so increasing demand for resources is then going to lead to human activities in which we see the environmental change that's very clearly evident in this image. Another commodity that obviously is very sought after is oil. And so that helps to understand why we're pumping up oil all throughout the world, in particular there in the Gulf of Mexico. And so not too long ago there was the big oil spill. So we can kind of use this as a way to once again showcase the whole systems approach. And so increasing demand for oil, human driving forces. Then the mining or the actual drilling for that particular oil, that's human activities. Environmental change, an oil spill, obviously is going to change this particular coastline. This particular beach is now, it goes from a nice sandy beach to a nice oily beach. Adverse consequences. Now we got an oil spill. Now we got dead birds. Now we got to clean up this mess. Now we got tourism that's going down in New Orleans. Now all these people, the fishing industry, the seafood industry is hurt considerably because of the oil spill that occurred here in the Gulf. And then coming up with solutions, and of course trying to cap it, trying to somehow clean up the oil, somehow trying to remove it from various seafoods, from various critters, from the coastlines, then coming up with solutions for that. But also solutions are, let's maybe think about other ways in which we can capture energy besides oil, besides petroleum. But of course, the secondary sector, also we see human activities that then lead to environmental change. The environmental change quite obvious here in terms of air pollution being produced from this factory. But we look in northern Indiana, we've got a lot of steel industry, steel plants. And those steel plants, like most steel and chemical industries, produce a ton or generate a ton of wastewater. And what do you do with that wastewater? You can't just go up in the sky and disappear. It's typically just essentially spewed into or dumped into a water body. And so then the consequences from this, if you go up to Lake Michigan, if you go up to Portage or go up to Gary, yeah, you can swim in the water, and yeah, they've cleaned it up quite a bit. But in the last 20 or 30 years, a lot of wastewater, a lot of toxic wastewater has been dumped into the tributaries, into Lake Michigan. And so we can see, once again, this systems approach. Increasing demand for steel. Okay, so that's the human driving force. So then, steel production, human activity. Then we see environmental change. Water that's being polluted, air that's being polluted. Consequences. Now we have to deal with this pollution. Now we can't go to the beach because of the polluted water. So then we see these consequences that then lead to solutions, coming up with ways to clean up the waterways, clean up the air, all of those various pollutants. Those would be then examples of solutions. And so once again, we can use these to show the flow of the systems approach.